My contact texted me during the meeting. Exit through the kitchen. Building is surrounded. Go now. You paying attention, Nikki? Anthony Benedetto's voice sliced through the cigarette smoke like a blade. The crime boss leaned forward, his thick fingers drumming against the mahogany table where surveillance photos of federal judge Catherine Williams were spread like tarot cards predicting death. This judge is refusing to dismiss our racketeering charges. Time she learned about family loyalty. I looked up from my phone, forcing my expression into the same cold indifference I'd worn for 14 months as Nicky Romano, low-level associate in the Benedetto crime family. My real name was Detective Alex Torino, NYPD undercover, and the text message burning on my screen meant everything was about to go sideways fast. Course I'm paying attention, boss. I slipped the phone into my jacket pocket, feeling the wire taped to my chest record every word. What kind of lesson we talking about? Frank DeLuca, Anthony's enforcer, smiled like a shark, scenting blood in the water. The permanent kind. Judge Williams thinks she's untouchable because she wears a black robe. We're gonna show her how wrong she is. Captain David Murphy shifted in his chair, the corrupt NYPD badge on his chest, catching the dim light from the single bulb hanging over our table in Gino's back room. He'd been my supposed inside contact for 8 months, feeding me information about police movements and investigations. Now I understood why that information had always seemed too convenient. Home invasion works best, Murphy said, spreading out floor plans of the judge's Westchester County house. Neighbors are far enough away that no one hears screaming. Security system has a 30-second delay before the alarm triggers. Plenty of time to get inside and make it look like robbery gone bad. Anthony nodded approvingly. Frank handles the judge. Murphy makes sure the responding officers take their time getting there. By the time backup arrives, it's just another tragic break-in. He turned to me with eyes like black ice. Nikki, you're our insurance. Clean up any loose ends. Make sure nothing traces back to the family. My mouth went dry as I realized what he meant. Kill any witnesses. Maybe even Judge Williams's family if they were home. The photos showed her teenage son and elementary school daughter, their faces bright with innocent smiles that would be erased forever if I didn't find a way to stop this. When do we move? I asked, hating how steady my voice sounded while my soul was screaming. Tonight, Anthony said. Murphy's got her protection detail reassigned to another case. House will be empty except for the family. He leaned back with satisfaction. By morning, Judge Catherine Williams will be just another statistic, and our legal problems disappear with her. DeLuca was studying the house plans with professional interest. 2 entry points. Back door through the kitchen, front door if we need a distraction. Alarm panel is in the hallway closet. Cut the phone lines first, jam the cell towers in the area. Murphy pulled out his police radio and adjusted the frequency. I'll monitor emergency dispatch. Make sure the first responders get conflicting information about the location. Buy us at least 20 minutes of clear operation time. I felt sick listening to them plan a federal judge's murder with the same casual efficiency they'd use to order dinner. These men weren't just criminals. They were predators who'd turned the justice system into their personal hunting ground. Judge Williams had made the mistake of refusing to play their game, and now she was going to die for it. Any questions about the operation? Anthony asked, looking directly at me. I shook my head. Sounds like you got everything covered, boss. Good. Anthony began gathering up the photos and floor plans. We meet at the warehouse at 11. Murphy brings the weapons, Frank brings the surveillance equipment, Nikki brings the cleanup supplies. He paused. And remember, this conversation never happened. Anyone talks, everyone dies. The meeting was breaking up when my phone buzzed again. Same contact, same urgent message. Exit through the kitchen. Building is surrounded. Go now. This time I saw additional texts flooding in. Murphy made you. He's FBI asset gone rogue. Anthony knows you're NYPD. They're planning to kill you instead of the judge. Move now. My blood turned to ice water as I processed the information. Murphy wasn't just corrupt. He was actively working against law enforcement. He'd identified me as an undercover cop and turned me into tonight's real target. The judge murder was just the cover story to get me isolated and eliminate the threat to their operation. DeLuca was already moving toward the main door, but his hand was resting on the gun bulge under his jacket. Murphy had positioned himself between me and the exit, his radio suddenly silent in his hand. Anthony was watching me with the predatory stillness of a snake preparing to strike. Actually, Nikki, Anthony said conversationally, there's one more thing we need to discuss before you leave. I stood up slowly, every muscle coiled for violence. Yeah, boss? Detective Alex Torino. The name hit the room like a gunshot. NYPD Shield number 8492. 14 months undercover. Did you really think we wouldn't figure it out? DeLuca's gun was already in his hand, pointed at my chest. Murphy had drawn his service weapon, the one he'd sworn an oath to use protecting innocent people. Anthony remained seated, completely confident in his control of the situation. The wire you're wearing stopped transmitting 10 minutes ago, Murphy said with cold satisfaction. I've been jamming FBI frequencies since you walked in here. Your backup team thinks you're still having a nice conversation about restaurant recommendations. My hand moved toward my own weapon, but DeLuca shook his head. Don't even think about it, cop. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Anthony pulled out a thick envelope and tossed it on the table. $60,000. That's what your life is worth to us, detective. More than the NYPD pays you in 2 years. He smiled without warmth. Of course, you won't live to spend it. but we believe in fair compensation for services rendered. What services? I managed to ask, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Information, Murphy replied. Every report you filed, every operation you participated in, every piece of intelligence you gathered. I've been feeding it all to the Benedetto family and their Russian partners. He laughed. You've been working for us the entire time, detective. You just didn't know it. The implications hit me like physical blows. 14 months of investigations compromised. Other undercover officers exposed and probably killed. Entire criminal networks protected by my unwitting collaboration with corruption that went deeper than I'd ever imagined. The 3 agents who disappeared during the Volkov operation last year, I said. You gave them up. Murphy's expression didn't change. Occupational hazard in our line of work. Sometimes good cops get in the way of better business opportunities. Anthony stood up, brushing imaginary lint from his expensive suit. Enough conversation. Frank, take Detective Torino for a ride. Make it look like a drug deal gone wrong. Leave the body where other cops will find it and get the message. DeLuca motioned with his gun toward the main exit. Move, pig. Time to pay for all the family business you disrupted. I took one step toward the door, then dove sideways as the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in half a second later, casting everything in hellish red shadows. Gunshots erupted from multiple directions, muzzle flashes strobing like deadly lightning in the confined space. FBI, get down! Get down! Voices shouted from everywhere at once as the restaurant's main dining room exploded into chaos. Tables crashed over, customers screamed, and automatic weapons fire stitched through the walls separating us from the main room. I rolled behind an overturned chair as DeLuca opened fire, his bullets splintering wood inches from my head. Murphy was shouting into his radio, trying to coordinate with corrupt officers, but his transmissions were being jammed by the same federal equipment he'd used against me. Anthony had produced a shotgun from somewhere and was advancing on my position with methodical precision. You brought the feds to my restaurant, detective. That's going to cost you everything you got. The kitchen door burst open, and Agent Lisa Park appeared in full tactical gear, her rifle already tracking targets. Alex, kitchen exit is clear. Move now. I sprinted toward her position while bullets chewed up the floor behind me. Murphy's shot caught me in the shoulder, spinning me around, but adrenaline kept me moving. Park laid down covering fire as I stumbled through the kitchen door, past stainless steel prep stations and industrial ovens that had become a war zone. How bad? She asked, pressing a field dressing against my shoulder wound. I'll live. What's the situation out there? 12 suspects in custody, 3 more barricaded in the main dining room. SWAT's moving in. Her expression was grim. Anthony Benedetto is still fighting. So is Murphy. We moved through the kitchen toward the back exit, stepping over broken dishes and scattered equipment. Through the serving window, I could see FBI agents in tactical gear advancing room by room, clearing corners and securing witnesses. The restaurant had become a battlefield, and innocent people were caught in the crossfire because of my blown cover. Agent Park, a voice crackled through her radio. Be advised, suspect Murphy is attempting to breach the kitchen. He's armed with department-issued weapons and appears to be targeting Detective Torino specifically. Copy that. Park switched her rifle to full auto. Alex, get behind the walk-in cooler. This isn't over yet. Murphy kicked through the swinging doors like an avenging demon, his police uniform torn and bloody, his eyes wild with desperation and rage. He'd lost everything tonight, his corrupt empire, his criminal partnerships, his future, and he wanted to take me down with him. 14 months of my work, he screamed, firing wildly in our direction. 14 months of careful planning destroyed by one idealistic cop who thinks justice actually matters. His bullets sparked off the stainless steel surfaces around us, ricocheting in unpredictable directions. Park returned fire, her shots precise and controlled, but Murphy had taken cover behind the industrial dishwasher and was using it like a fortress. You want justice, detective? Murphy shouted. Here's justice. 3 federal agents dead because of the information you helped us gather. Witnesses murdered because you identified them to us. Their blood is on your hands. Each word hit me like a physical blow because I knew he was right. My undercover work had been used against the very people I'd sworn to protect. Every report I'd filed, every criminal I'd identified, every piece of intelligence I'd gathered had been twisted into a weapon against law enforcement. That ends tonight, I called back. Whatever damage has been done, it stops here. Nothing stops. Murphy rose from cover, his gun trained on Agent Park. The network goes deeper than you can imagine. Cops, prosecutors, judges, federal agents. We own all of them. Kill us tonight, 10 more take our place tomorrow. Park's shot took him in the chest, slamming him back against the dishwasher. His return fire went wide, shattering wine bottles on the rack above our heads. Red wine mixed with blood on the kitchen floor as Murphy slumped against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The judge, he whispered with his dying breath. Williams, tonight wasn't about killing her, was about protecting her. She's not the target. She's the asset. Federal prosecutor working with us. Whole thing was set up to eliminate you and make her look like victim. The words hit me like ice water. Everything I thought I understood about the operation was backwards. Judge Williams wasn't the target. She was part of the conspiracy. The murder plot was designed to remove me while giving her victimhood credibility that would shield her from investigation. Park was already on her radio, coordinating with other units. All teams, be advised. Primary target may not be hostile. Repeat, Judge Catherine Williams may be compromised asset, not intended victim. The response came back immediately. Copy that. Judge Williams reported attempted break-in at her residence 20 minutes ago. Patrol units responding found no evidence of forced entry or criminal activity. She's establishing her alibi, I realized, making herself look like the intended victim while we were all here shooting up the restaurant. Anthony Benedetto appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expensive suit torn and stained with blood, his shotgun broken across one knee. 2 FBI agents had him at gunpoint, but he was still smiling like a man who'd won the lottery. Detective Torino, he called out cheerfully. Congratulations on surviving your first real test. Too bad you'll never survive the second one. What second test? Park demanded. Anthony's smile widened. The one where you find out who's really running this operation. Hint, it ain't me, and it ain't the dead crooked cop bleeding all over the floor. Agent Park spoke into her radio again. Command, requesting immediate protective detail for Detective Torino. Suspects are indicating ongoing threat to officer safety. The response was immediate and chilling. Negative on protective detail. Detective Torino is flagged for immediate interrogation regarding potential collaboration with criminal enterprise. Transport him to federal facility for questioning. Park's expression went cold. Say again, Command? Detective Torino is suspected of voluntary cooperation with organized crime syndicate. Evidence suggests his undercover assignment was cover for actual criminal activity. Bring him in for enhanced interrogation immediately. I felt the world tilt sideways as I realized the depth of the trap. The corruption didn't just run through NYPD and local courts. It had infected the federal law enforcement system, turning my own colleagues against me. Murphy's network had orchestrated everything, including my rescue, to position me as the fall guy for their entire operation. Agent Park, I said quietly, how well do you know the people giving you orders right now? She looked at her radio with growing suspicion. 15 years with the Bureau. Never had reason to doubt command structure before tonight. Maybe tonight's a good time to start. Anthony was laughing now, a sound like breaking glass. You're just figuring it out, aren't you, Detective? The federal agents who rescued you tonight aren't the good guys. They're the cleanup crew. Their job is to make sure you disappear permanently and the real criminals walk away clean. The kitchen around us had fallen silent, except for the distant sounds of law enforcement securing the restaurant's main dining room. But that silence felt wrong, like the pause before an explosion. Park was studying her radio with professional suspicion, probably wondering why her backup wasn't responding to her calls. Agent Park, a new voice crackled through her radio. This is Assistant Director Frank Castellano. You are ordered to secure Detective Torino and transport him to Facility 7 for immediate processing. Use whatever force necessary to ensure compliance. Park looked at me with questions in her eyes. Facility 7 doesn't exist in our protocol manual. Because it's not an FBI facility, I realized. It's wherever they take cops who know too much about the wrong people. She switched off her radio and pulled out her cell phone. I'm calling this in to headquarters through civilian channels. Something's not right about any of this. But her phone showed no signal, despite being in the middle of Manhattan. The same jamming equipment Murphy had used against me was still active, cutting us off from legitimate law enforcement and leaving us isolated with people who might not be who they claim to be. Agent Park, I said carefully, how did you know to come to this restaurant tonight? Who gave you the intelligence that I was in trouble? Her face went pale as she realized the implications. Anonymous tip came through federal tip line. Caller said undercover NYPD detective was about to be murdered at Gino's restaurant. Gave your name, badge number, physical description. Anonymous tip from someone who knew details that should have been classified federal information. Someone inside the system. She raised her rifle, suddenly aware that we might not be alone in the kitchen. Someone who wanted us here at exactly this time for exactly this reason. The back exit door opened and 3 figures in FBI tactical gear entered with weapons drawn. Their faces were covered by combat masks, and their movements had the coordinated precision of professional soldiers rather than law enforcement officers. Agent Park, the lead figure spoke with mechanical authority. Detective Torino is to be transferred to federal custody immediately. Comply with this directive or face charges of obstruction of justice. Park kept her weapon trained on them. Identify yourselves. Badge numbers and authorization codes. Classification requires immediate compliance without verification protocols. That wasn't FBI procedure. Real federal agents always provided identification when requested by other law enforcement. These men were operating under protocols that didn't exist in legitimate law enforcement agencies. Alex, Park said quietly, we're going out the front way. Through whatever chaos is happening in the dining room. These people aren't who they claim to be. We backed toward the kitchen's main entrance while the 3 figures advanced on our position. Their weapons were military-grade assault rifles, not the standard FBI equipment Park would recognize. Their tactical gear bore no identifying marks or agency logos, just black fabric and anonymous authority. The dining room was a disaster area of overturned tables, broken glass, and traumatized customers giving statements to real FBI agents who were processing the scene with methodical professionalism. The contrast between legitimate law enforcement and the anonymous figures pursuing us was obvious once you knew what to look for. Agent Park, a familiar voice called from across the room. Agent David Kim waved us over to his position near the restaurant's front entrance. Command wants Detective Torino transferred immediately to secure facility for debriefing. Park raised her weapon toward Kim. How do you know Detective Torino? His undercover assignment was classified above your clearance level. Kim's expression shifted from friendly to predatory in an instant. Agent Park, you are interfering with a federal operation. Stand down immediately or face criminal charges. Show me your authorization paperwork. Instead of reaching for identification, Kim drew his sidearm. Around the dining room, other figures in FBI gear began moving toward our position with coordinated precision that had nothing to do with law enforcement protocols and everything to do with military assault tactics. The whole scene is compromised, I realized. Real FBI, fake FBI, corrupt police all mixed together. We can't trust anyone wearing a badge tonight. Park was scanning the room for genuine threats versus legitimate agents. Fire exit by the bar. We move fast. Get to my vehicle. Call for backup from outside the city. We sprinted across the dining room, jumping over debris and crashed furniture while shouts erupted behind us. Multiple weapons opened fire, but the bullets were aimed to wound and capture rather than kill outright. They wanted me alive for whatever came next. The fire exit opened onto an alley behind the restaurant, where Park's unmarked federal vehicle waited under a flickering streetlight. She was fumbling with her keys when the back doors of a panel van parked across the alley flew open and armed figures poured out. FBI, get down on the ground! But their voices had the same mechanical quality as the figures in the kitchen. Too many federal agents, too much coordination, too much confusion about who was giving orders and why. The entire law enforcement response had been orchestrated to look legitimate while serving entirely different purposes. Park's vehicle exploded in a ball of orange flame that lit up the entire alley. The blast threw us both against the restaurant's back wall, ears ringing, vision blurred by smoke and debris. Someone had placed charges on her car, probably while we were inside fighting for our lives. Alex! Park grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the street. My backup vehicle is 2 blocks away. We just have to reach it without getting killed by people who might be federal agents or might be assassins dressed like federal agents. We ran through Manhattan streets that had become a war zone of legitimate law enforcement, criminal organizations, corrupt officials, and unknown players with unknown agendas. Every siren could be bringing help or bringing death. Every badge could represent justice or represent the conspiracy that wanted me dead. Park's backup vehicle was a civilian sedan parked in a residential area where normal people were going about their normal lives, unaware that a battle for the soul of American law enforcement was being fought in their neighborhood. She started the engine while I collapsed into the passenger seat, my shoulder wound bleeding through the field dressing. Where do we go? I asked. If the corruption goes as high as Murphy claimed, there might not be anywhere safe. There's someone I trust. Deputy Marshal Teresa Vega. She's been investigating corruption in federal law enforcement for 2 years. If anyone can sort out who's legitimate and who's not, it's her. Park drove through the city with professional evasion techniques, taking random turns and checking mirrors constantly for surveillance. But I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Every few blocks, we passed vehicles that looked like unmarked law enforcement, and they were all heading in the same direction we were. Agent Park, I think they're herding us toward something. Every route you take, there's another vehicle that just happens to be going the same way. She checked her mirrors again. You're right. They're not following us. They're guiding us, probably toward Deputy Marshal Vega's location. What if Vega is part of it? What if this entire thing is designed to bring us to her? Park pulled over in a parking garage and turned off the engine. Then we're screwed, because she's the only person I trust in federal law enforcement right now, and if she's compromised, there's nowhere left to run. Her phone rang, displaying a number she recognized. Deputy Marshal Teresa Vega. Agent Park, thank God you're alive. I've been monitoring radio traffic about the restaurant incident. You and Detective Torino need to get to my location immediately. I have information about the corruption network that goes higher than anyone suspected. Park looked at me with desperate hope. Teresa, how do we know you're really you and not someone using your phone? Because I know that Detective Torino's undercover assignment was compromised from the beginning. His handler, Captain Murphy, has been feeding information to organized crime for 2 years. The Benedetto family was never the real target. They were just a front for a much larger operation involving federal judges, prosecutors, and high-ranking FBI officials. The words confirmed what I'd been suspecting. My entire 14 months of undercover work had been an elaborate setup to gather intelligence that would be used against law enforcement rather than in support of it. I'd been an unwitting asset for the very criminals I thought I was fighting. Where do you want to meet? Park asked. Federal Building, Floor 12, Conference Room C. I'll have evidence that proves the scope of this conspiracy and identifies everyone involved. Park hung up and looked at me with grim determination. It could be a trap. Everything's been a trap since the moment I walked into Gino's restaurant 14 months ago. At least this trap might give us answers before it kills us. We drove to the Federal Building through streets that looked normal, but felt like occupied territory. Every police car could be friend or enemy. Every federal agent could be legitimate or criminal. The line between law enforcement and organized crime had been erased, leaving us in a world where badges and authority meant nothing. The Federal Building's security checkpoint waved us through without the usual verification procedures, which immediately set off alarm bells in both our minds. Real federal security would have detained us for questioning after the night's events. The fact that we were allowed to proceed meant someone wanted us in the building for reasons that had nothing to do with legitimate law enforcement. Floor 12 was eerily quiet, with most offices dark and abandoned. Conference room C was at the end of a long hallway, lined with windows that looked out over the city lights. Through the glass, I could see Deputy Marshal Teresa Vega sitting at a conference table covered with documents and photographs. "Agent Park," she called as we approached the door. "Detective Torino, thank you for coming. What I'm about to show you will change everything you thought you knew about law enforcement in this country." We entered the conference room and Vega gestured for us to sit across from her. The documents spread across the table were surveillance photos, financial records, wiretap transcripts, and organizational charts showing connections between criminal organizations and federal agencies. "The corruption network calls itself the System," Vega began. "It's been operating for 15 years, gradually infiltrating every level of law enforcement from local police to federal prosecutors. Their goal isn't just to avoid prosecution, it's to control the entire justice system for their own purposes." She showed us photos of judges, prosecutors, FBI directors, and police commissioners, all connected by red lines indicating financial relationships or criminal collaboration. The scope was staggering. Dozens of high-ranking officials working together to subvert justice for profit. "Detective Torino, your undercover assignment was designed to gather intelligence about honest law enforcement officers who posed a threat to the system. Every report you filed, every criminal you identified, every piece of information you collected was used to target good cops and federal agents for elimination." The words hit me like physical blows. 14 months of my life had been spent helping criminals identify and murder the very people I'd sworn to protect. The guilt was overwhelming, but Vega wasn't finished with her revelations. "Agent Park, your assignment to rescue Detective Torino tonight was also planned by the system. They needed a reason to bring both of you to this location at this specific time." Park drew her weapon. "What location? What time?" Vega smiled, and her expression transformed from concerned law enforcement officer to predatory criminal. "The location where 2 troublesome federal agents and 1 compromised detective disappear forever, and their deaths are blamed on organized crime retaliation." The conference room windows exploded inward as armed figures rappelled down from the roof on tactical ropes. They crashed through the glass in perfect synchronization, landing in combat positions with assault rifles trained on our location. Agent Park opened fire, but there were too many targets from too many directions. I dove behind the conference table as bullets chewed up the walls around us. Park was returning fire methodically, but she was outnumbered and outgunned by professional soldiers who were using federal law enforcement as cover for assassination operations. "Detective Torino," Vega called over the gunfire. "You have 30 seconds to surrender before we start shooting innocent people in the building to motivate your compliance." Through the broken windows, I could see helicopters circling the federal building with spotlights illuminating our position. The entire block was probably surrounded by a mixture of legitimate law enforcement and criminal assets, all coordinated to look like a proper federal operation. Agent Park had taken cover behind an overturned desk, but she was bleeding from multiple wounds and running low on ammunition. "Alex, there's something you need to know about tonight. The restaurant, the rescue, all of it. I'm not really FBI." My world tilted sideways again. "What?" "Internal Affairs, NYPD. I've been investigating Captain Murphy's corruption network for 8 months. When we learned you were in danger tonight, I borrowed federal credentials to mount a rescue operation. So the person I'd trusted as my FBI backup was actually a police internal affairs investigator who'd been running her own unauthorized operation. The layers of deception were so complex that I was no longer certain who was legitimate and who was criminal in this entire nightmare. Then who are the real FBI agents? Most of them are probably legitimate, but they're getting orders from compromised supervisors who are part of the system. They think they're conducting proper federal operations while actually serving criminal interests." Vega was advancing on our position behind a wall of armed figures who moved with military precision. "Detective Torino, you've caused us significant problems over the past 14 months. The information you gathered was valuable, but your moral qualms about our methods made you unreliable. Time to retire from law enforcement permanently." I could hear sirens approaching from multiple directions, which meant either legitimate backup was arriving or more criminal assets were being deployed. In this situation, it was impossible to tell the difference. Agent Park handed me her backup weapon. "Alex, I need you to understand something. The corruption network isn't just about money or power. They're selling federal law enforcement resources to foreign intelligence services. Russia, China, North Korea. They're using American police and FBI agents to gather intelligence for hostile foreign governments." The implications were staggering. The system wasn't just undermining American justice, it was actively betraying national security for profit. Every criminal they protected, every investigation they compromised, every honest cop they eliminated was weakening America's ability to defend itself against foreign threats. How deep does it go? All the way to the top. Federal judges, Supreme Court clerks, congressional oversight committees. They own enough of the system to control investigations, prosecutions, and judicial decisions. Park was reloading her weapon with practiced efficiency. "Your undercover work identified honest federal agents who were getting too close to the truth. Those agents were eliminated through operations that looked like criminal retaliation, but were actually ordered by their own supervisors. The armed figures were preparing for final assault on our position. Through the broken windows, I could see more helicopters approaching with additional tactical teams. In moments, the conference room would be overrun by superior firepower and coordination. That's when the real FBI arrived. The difference was immediately obvious. Legitimate federal agents announced themselves clearly, followed proper tactical protocols, and didn't shoot first. The criminal assets posing as law enforcement opened fire on the real agents, revealing their true nature through their actions. The conference room became a battlefield as legitimate law enforcement fought against criminal organizations using federal equipment and credentials. The gunfire was deafening. Muzzle flashes strobed like deadly lightning, and the air filled with smoke and shouts and the screams of wounded combatants. Agent Park and I fought our way toward the genuine FBI agents who were advancing room by room through the federal building. The real agents wore proper identification, followed rules of engagement, and protected civilians rather than using them as human shields. FBI, get down! This is a federal operation. But half the people shouting those words were criminals, and the other half were legitimate agents. The chaos was intentional, designed to create maximum confusion while the system's assets escaped or eliminated threats to their operation. I saw Deputy Marshal Teresa Vega heading for the stairwell with a briefcase full of documents, probably evidence that would expose the system's activities. She was accompanied by two figures in federal tactical gear who were clearing her path with professional efficiency. Park, Vega's running with the evidence. We pursued them through the federal building's corridors, while gunfire echoed from multiple floors. The entire building had become a war zone, as genuine federal agents fought against criminal assets using identical equipment and identical authority claims. The stairwell was a vertical battlefield. Vega's escort team was laying down suppressing fire to cover her escape, while Agent Park and I advanced floor by floor, trying to prevent the system's leadership from disappearing into whatever protection network they'd established. Detective Torino, Vega called from several floors below us. You still don't understand what you're fighting. The system has been protecting America from threats that legitimate law enforcement can't handle. What threats? Terrorist organizations, foreign intelligence services, international criminal syndicates. Sometimes justice requires methods that idealistic cops like you can't stomach. Her words echoed off concrete walls as we pursued her toward the building's parking garage. She was probably right that law enforcement sometimes required compromises and moral flexibility, but the system had crossed the line from necessary pragmatism to outright betrayal of everything law enforcement was supposed to represent. The parking garage was filled with vehicles that looked like legitimate federal law enforcement but could have been criminal assets. Every SUV with tinted windows could contain backup for Vega or legitimate agents responding to the crisis. There was no way to distinguish friend from enemy until they started shooting. Vega reached a black Suburban that immediately started moving toward the garage exit. Agent Park commandeered another vehicle, and we gave chase through Manhattan streets that had become an urban battlefield between competing law enforcement factions. Where would she go? Park asked, weaving through traffic while checking mirrors for pursuit. Somewhere with protection. Federal courthouse, police headquarters, maybe the airport if she's planning to leave the country. But Vega wasn't running. Her vehicle was heading toward Manhattan's financial district, probably toward a secure facility where the system conducted its most sensitive operations. If we could follow her there, we might finally learn the full scope of the conspiracy. The chase ended at a nondescript office building that could have housed anything from accounting firms to intelligence operations. Vega's vehicle disappeared into an underground garage while we parked across the street and tried to figure out our next move. That building is registered to a shell company that's connected to dozens of federal contracts, Park said, checking her laptop. Defense consulting, intelligence analysis, federal law enforcement training. It's the perfect cover for coordinating corruption across multiple agencies. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Detective Torino, time to learn the truth about your real assignment. Conference room 2A. Come alone or Agent Park dies tonight. I showed Park the message. They're still trying to control the situation. Even now, they think they can manipulate us into serving their purposes. Maybe they can. What if everything we've discovered tonight is exactly what they wanted us to discover? What if this entire chain of events was designed to bring us to this building for reasons we don't understand yet? The possibility was terrifying because it meant the system was still several moves ahead of us in a game we didn't fully comprehend. But we'd come too far to back down now, and running would just delay the inevitable confrontation with forces that had already demonstrated their ability to reach us anywhere. We entered the building through a lobby that looked like any other corporate office space. The security guard waved us toward the elevators without asking for identification, which confirmed that our arrival was expected and probably orchestrated. Conference room 2A was on the 20th floor, overlooking Manhattan's financial district. The room was dark except for a single lamp illuminating a figure sitting at the head of a polished conference table. When he turned around, I recognized FBI Assistant Director Frank Castellano, the man who'd coordinated federal law enforcement response to organized crime for the past decade. Detective Torino, Agent Park, thank you for coming. Please sit down. It's time you learned what you've really been fighting for the past 14 months. Castellano was surrounded by documents, photographs, and computer screens displaying information about criminal organizations, foreign intelligence services, and terrorist networks. The scope of data was overwhelming. Thousands of names, faces, connections, and operations spanning multiple countries and criminal enterprises. The system, as Deputy Marshal Vega called it, is actually a joint task force between American law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Our mission is to combat threats that traditional law enforcement can't address through conventional methods. Agent Park kept her weapon drawn, but didn't point it directly at Castellano. What kind of threats require murdering honest cops and federal agents? The kind that threaten American national security in ways that most law enforcement officers aren't cleared to understand. Castellano activated a wall display that showed a global map covered with red markers indicating active threats to American interests. Terrorist organizations funded by foreign governments. Criminal syndicates that launder money for hostile intelligence services. Corruption networks that sell American military secrets to enemy nations. I studied the map and realized that many of the red markers corresponded to criminal organizations I'd encountered during my undercover assignment. The Benedetto family wasn't just a local crime syndicate. They were part of an international network that posed legitimate threats to national security. Detective Torino, your undercover work identified connections between Russian intelligence services and American organized crime that we've been tracking for years. The information you gathered helped us prevent 3 separate terrorist attacks and neutralize dozens of foreign intelligence assets operating in American cities. The revelation hit me like cold water. If Castellano was telling the truth, then my undercover work had actually been serving legitimate national security purposes rather than helping criminals target honest cops. But that didn't explain the murders and corruption I'd witnessed. What about Captain Murphy? What about the agents who were killed? Casualties of war, Castellano replied without emotion. Murphy was a legitimate double agent who'd infiltrated organized crime for us. When his cover was blown, he had to maintain his criminal identity to protect ongoing operations. The agents who died were unfortunately exposed by security breaches that we couldn't prevent. Agent Park wasn't buying the explanation. Security breaches or deliberate sacrifices to maintain your cover story? Sometimes the same thing. National security requires difficult choices that local law enforcement officers aren't trained to make. Castellano pulled up files on the 3 murdered agents. These officers discovered aspects of our operations that could have compromised years of intelligence gathering and prevented us from stopping imminent terrorist attacks. The moral complexity was staggering. If the system was actually a legitimate counterintelligence operation, then the corruption and murders I'd witnessed were justifiable sacrifices to protect national security. But if Castellano was lying, then I was being manipulated into accepting criminal behavior disguised as patriotic duty. Prove it, I said. Show me evidence that the system prevented terrorist attacks. Show me proof that the agents who died were actually threats to national security rather than honest cops who discovered corruption. Castellano smiled and activated another display. 3 weeks ago, the Benedetto family was planning to sell stolen military explosives to a terrorist cell operating in New York City. Your intelligence helped us intercept that sale and arrest the terrorists before they could detonate a truck bomb in Times Square. The display showed surveillance footage of a sting operation where FBI agents posing as arms dealers arrested Middle Eastern men who were attempting to purchase military-grade explosives. The footage looked legitimate, but intelligence agencies were capable of fabricating evidence when necessary. 2 months ago, Captain Murphy's information helped us identify a Russian intelligence officer who was recruiting federal judges to influence court decisions affecting national security cases. We turned that operation into a double-agent scenario that's still providing valuable intelligence about Russian activities in America. More footage showed what appeared to be legitimate counterintelligence operations against foreign threats, but every piece of evidence Castellano presented could have been manufactured to support his narrative. Agent Park was studying the displays with professional skepticism. This all looks very convincing, Assistant Director. But I notice you haven't explained why Deputy Marshal Vega was planning to kill us tonight, or why we were chased through Manhattan by people using federal credentials to commit crimes. Because you discovered aspects of our operations that weren't meant to be exposed. Vega was trying to protect ongoing investigations and agent safety by bringing you here for proper briefing rather than letting you compromise years of work through uninformed actions. By shooting at us with military weapons. By using necessary force to prevent you from revealing classified operations to hostile intelligence services who monitor police communications. Castellano's explanations were plausible, but felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The system might genuinely be fighting foreign threats to American security, but their methods had crossed lines that no legitimate law enforcement agency should cross. What happens now? I asked. Now you become part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Your undercover skills and insider knowledge of organized crime make you valuable assets for operations against threats that traditional law enforcement can't handle. He was offering me a choice between accepting the system's version of justice or becoming another casualty of their war against foreign threats, the same choice Murphy had probably faced when he'd first been recruited into their organization. And if we refuse, then you'll be classified as security risks who pose unacceptable threats to ongoing national security operations. Castellano's tone remained conversational, but the implication was clear. We'll be forced to take whatever steps are necessary to protect American interests. Agent Park lowered her weapon slightly. How do we know you're telling the truth about national security threats? How do we know this isn't just elaborate justification for criminal activity? You don't, Castellano admitted. That's what makes intelligence work different from regular law enforcement. Sometimes you have to act on incomplete information and trust that people with higher security clearances are making correct decisions about threats you're not qualified to evaluate. It was the perfect trap. Accept their authority based on classified information we weren't allowed to see, or be eliminated as threats to operations we weren't allowed to understand. The system had created a closed loop of justification that made any opposition appear to be treasonous obstruction of national security. But something about Castellano's presentation bothered me. The timing was too convenient, the evidence too perfectly arranged, the explanations too rehearsed. It felt like a sales pitch rather than a genuine intelligence briefing. Assistant Director, there's something I need to tell you about tonight's events. I stood up and moved toward the window overlooking Manhattan's financial district. During the restaurant operation, Anthony Benedetto told me that Judge Catherine Williams was actually working with organized crime, not being targeted by them. Castellano's expression didn't change. Disinformation. Benedetto was trying to confuse you and undermine your confidence in federal law enforcement. Maybe. But he also said the whole operation was designed to eliminate me while making Judge Williams look like an innocent victim who needed protection from organized crime retaliation. Again, disinformation designed to sow distrust and confusion. I turned around to face him directly. Then explain how Judge Williams reported an attempted break-in at her residence at exactly the same time we were fighting for our lives at Gino's restaurant. Explain how she established a perfect alibi while we were being set up for elimination. For the first time, Castellano looked genuinely surprised. Judge Williams reported what kind of break-in? Home invasion attempt. Patrol officers found no evidence of forced entry or criminal activity. Looks like she was establishing victimhood credentials while her supposed enemies were being killed or captured. Agent Park was watching Castellano's reaction with professional interest. If Judge Williams is actually part of the corruption network, then everything you've told us about protecting national security could be cover for protecting criminal operations. Castellano was quiet for a long moment, studying information on his computer screens. When he looked up, his expression had changed from confident authority to genuine concern. Detective Torino, Agent Park, I think we've all been manipulated tonight. The system I described to you is real, but it may have been compromised by the same criminal networks it was designed to combat. The admission hit the room like cold water. If even Castellano wasn't certain who was legitimate and who was criminal in the federal law enforcement system, then the corruption went deeper than anyone had suspected. What does that mean for us? Park asked. It means we're all in danger from people who've been using legitimate counterintelligence operations as cover for criminal activity. Castellano was already shutting down his computer systems and gathering classified documents. If Judge Williams is indeed compromised, then she's been using her position to protect criminal organizations while appearing to be their target. The implications were staggering. A federal judge working with organized crime would have access to sealed indictments, witness protection information, law enforcement operation plans, and intelligence about ongoing investigations. She could sabotage prosecutions, expose undercover agents, and coordinate criminal operations with complete inside knowledge of law enforcement responses. How many other judges? I asked. How many prosecutors, FBI agents, police commissioners? How deep does the real corruption go? Deeper than any of us imagined. Castellano was packing his documents into a secure briefcase. And now that you've exposed Judge Williams, they'll be coming for all of us. As if summoned by his words, the building's fire alarm began blaring throughout the structure. Emergency lighting activated, casting everything in hellish red shadows. Through the conference room windows, I could see unmarked vehicles surrounding the building while helicopters circled overhead with spotlights illuminating escape routes. The system's cleanup crew, Castellano explained grimly. When operations are compromised, they eliminate all witnesses and evidence. We have maybe 10 minutes before they breach this floor. Agent Park was already moving toward the door. Emergency stairs? Blocked. They'll have teams covering every exit route. Our only chance is to go up to the roof and hope legitimate federal backup arrives before we're eliminated. We ran through corridors filled with the sound of alarms and the distant noise of tactical teams entering the building from multiple points. The elevators were disabled, forcing us to use emergency stairs that echoed with the sounds of armed figures climbing toward our position. The roof access door was already open when we reached it, which meant someone had arrived ahead of us. On the rooftop, Deputy Marshal Teresa Vega was waiting with the same briefcase she'd carried from the federal building, now accompanied by 6 figures in tactical gear who were setting up defensive positions. Assistant Director Castellano, she called over the sound of approaching helicopters. Thank you for bringing Detective Torino and Agent Park to this location. Makes our job much simpler. Castellano raised his hands in surrender. Marshal Vega, these officers have information that could compromise ongoing national security operations. They need to be debriefed through proper channels, not eliminated as security risks. There are no proper channels anymore, Vega replied. The corruption has infected every level of federal law enforcement. The only solution is to eliminate compromised personnel and start over with people who understand the difference between idealistic justice and practical national security. Her tactical team was advancing on our position with weapons drawn. These weren't arrests. They were executions disguised as national security operations. The system had decided that anyone who questioned their methods was an enemy of American security. Detective Torino, Vega continued, your undercover work was valuable, but your moral objections to necessary methods made you a liability. Tonight, you and Agent Park joined the other law enforcement officers who couldn't adapt to modern security requirements. I could see genuine FBI helicopters approaching from the east, while unmarked aircraft circled from other directions. The real federal law enforcement was finally arriving to sort out the legitimate agents from the criminal assets, but they might not arrive in time to prevent more murders. Agent Park had taken cover behind a rooftop air conditioning unit and was preparing for final confrontation. Alex, whatever happens tonight, make sure the truth gets out about Judge Williams and the others. Don't let them bury this with our bodies. The tactical team was preparing for final assault when the first FBI helicopter arrived with genuine federal agents rappelling onto the rooftop. The difference was immediately obvious. Real FBI agents announced themselves clearly, demanded surrender rather than shooting immediately, and followed proper rules of engagement. The gunfight that followed was brief, but intense. Vega's team opened fire on the legitimate agents, revealing their criminal nature through their actions. Agent Park and I fought alongside the real FBI, while Castellano provided intelligence about the system's operations and personnel. When the smoke cleared, Teresa Vega was dead, along with most of her tactical team. The briefcase she'd been carrying contained evidence of corruption that reached into dozens of federal agencies and hundreds of individual officers. The scope of betrayal was staggering. Years of investigations compromised, countless criminals protected, numerous honest agents murdered. But the most damaging revelation was yet to come. Among Vega's documents was proof that Judge Catherine Williams had been coordinating with foreign intelligence services to sell American law enforcement information to hostile governments. The corruption wasn't just about money or power, it was about treason that had weakened America's ability to defend itself. 3 months later, I testified before a congressional oversight committee about the system's operations and the scope of corruption in federal law enforcement. Judge Williams was arrested along with 37 other federal officials who'd been selling American security information to foreign governments. Agent Park received commendation for her investigative work and was promoted to head a new task force dedicated to rooting out corruption in federal agencies. Assistant Director Castellano was cleared of criminal wrongdoing, but chose early retirement, unable to trust the system he'd served for 20 years. As for me, I requested transfer to a small police department in Montana, where federal corruption was less likely to reach and honest police work was still possible. Sometimes justice requires simple choices between right and wrong, rather than complex calculations about national security and necessary evils. The scar on my shoulder reminds me daily that corruption can wear any badge and speak with any authority, but it also reminds me that individual officers can still make a difference when they choose courage over compromise, even when the entire system seems designed to destroy anyone who refuses to play along.